Oh, right. Yeah, this come from. I think must have been the comment of the Prince Andrew. What's her name? Virginia. Groff. What? Yeah, whatever her second name is. But yeah, someone commented saying. At first, I didn't know. Obviously, I knew the Jeffrey Epstein bit, but when I clicked on it, I was like, "Oh, that's this guy. I know this guy, Eric Weinstein. It's him and his brother, isn't it? I can't think of his brother's name, but they're a bit like the Hitchens of America." Just like two smart brothers. But I think it was him. It was either him or his brother that I watched. Terrence Howard, the actor, where he was talking about maths, being a maths genius or whatever. But yeah, when I was going to see what this was saying anyway. But once I saw it was him, I was like, oh yeah, I wonder what he's got to say because it is like I say, it's a bit of the Hitchens effect, where when one of the Hitchens says something, he kind of gives it a bit of validity. But they are one of them people, just smart people. So I did think, yeah, I wonder what his take on it, and I wonder if it's because I've watched so many people that went to Diddy parties that are like, oh, I left at 7:30, got home and got my curtains drawn. I was like, yeah, of course you did. But yeah, Eric Weinstein on meeting Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go. Also, let me know his brother's name. I can't think, although I could look it up. But yeah.
All right, there is some glass wall that is preventing the Epstein story from being discussed properly. Everyone's interested in it, the questions are basic, and there's a guaranteed story to write. Simply ask the most basic questions of the officials involved and print whatever comes back. Whatever it is, there's no possibility of an uninteresting answer to the central questions. And yet, the central questions are not asked.
And what are those central questions?
The first one is very simple. You have to ask every government that might be involved, was Jeffrey Epstein known to be attached to any intelligence agency anywhere in the world? Then you have to ask, were his vile activities known to the intelligence agencies, and was there any kind of tacit approval or understanding, or is there a categorical denial that such techniques may never be used? Now, we have not recorded the no comments, or we don't discuss sources and methods. That's typical in these stories, where you should be able to say, can I at least get a statement that we would never condone activities to be used for intelligence gathering purposes? All right, the next question. Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to be a hedge fund manager of some kind, and he had extensive offices at a place called Villard House, the former Helmsley Palace. This trophy building is a place that I myself dropped off materials for Jeffrey Epstein to review in connection to a hedge fund matter. What I want to know is, where are the trading records from Villard House? It would be almost impossible to go back in time and fake trading records for a billion-dollar plus hedge fund. And yet nobody seems to have ever recorded a trade with Jeffrey Epstein. We don't know where he did prime brokerage. There are no financial records that explain his fortune.
Are those publicly available, or should those be publicly available?
I don't even care about that. Where are the records? If there are no records, I mean, presumably this person paid taxes. Presumably this person had to make SEC filings. I don't know. But the key issue is, I don't think there was a hedge fund. When I met Jeffrey,
Maybe not. Maybe not if it. Do you know what I mean? I could imagine that there's a level of elite that you don't pay taxes because probably the taxes go to you anyway. But yeah, yeah.
which might have been something like 2002, before he was charged with sex crime violations in Florida, I did not believe that Jeffrey Epstein was a hedge fund manager. And I, in fact, called my wife at the time and I said, this man appears to be a construct. And she said, what do you mean by a construct? And I said, it's like they've hired an actor to play a hedge fund manager. But this person didn't behave like the super rich normally behave. He didn't behave like a hedge fund manager behaved. He didn't have any of the substance that you would normally associate with people of that class. I'm not saying he wasn't smart, but he was glib, and he lived essentially like he was Gatsby. I only met him once. It was probably for about an hour or so. But he was an absolutely terrifying person to encounter. It would be surprising to me if I was alone in that I immediately had the suspicion that I was looking at somebody who had been constructed rather than something that had organically arisen within the financial community. Further questions that need to be asked. Where was
Yeah, what everything he's saying so far. Actually, John Wedger. Look up John Wedger. He's a UK ex-policeman, but like the people that kind of don't exist, basically. Like what he's saying is so common to do with these cases when it comes to the higher up in the British elite and the American. And John Wedger, I saw on a thing that he said that Putin. There's a quote from Putin that said the British and American government is full of pedophiles. Like I think he said it years ago, but so many things line up as being exact. Like and the thing of him being a construct, like it was actually someone was saying that. Like I completely get what he's saying there, where it's like he doesn't have the he's being put into a position that he hasn't earned, and he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's obviously there and been, like he said, constructed for a purpose. Yeah, that's common too. That these people that, yeah, I couldn't put it better. Constructed. That's the best way. A person who's constructed. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. But what he's saying is so eerily tallies up with all the big players in that world in the British upper class.
Maxwell's passport last cited? Assume that she has one or more passports, and assume that governments record when passports go through a border point. Okay. We should at least be able to ascertain where was the last point where her passports, or at least one of her passports, were officially seen. I don't know of anybody asking this question. Can we not call up Interpol? Is there no sense in which we can guess where she was last located? What was the last social event at which she was recorded? We don't seem to know anything about this person. Why are we not talking to Les Wexner? I don't understand why these people are not being interviewed or deposed. We have a very strange situation. And in all of these cases...
And this is what I mean. This is what John Wedger found out in the police. I really recommend, because this is going to be mainly Americans that I guess that will click on this, but Americans just look up John Wedger and all of his stuff, but look up his actual story. And he was a policeman, and in every department of the police he went into, it all kind of, all the criminals he was chasing after had some relation back to child homes and being abused. And then he found this deep cover up of abuse of children in our country, and then he wanted to take it. He was like, obviously he's a policeman, he's just a policeman, so he's finding his stuff out, and he wants to do policeman shit. And literally his higher ups, he said someone come in, a higher up police officer than him, because he's like, he was getting threatened with everything. They actually tried to put him in prison, this policeman who perfect record, because he printed something for his home life off of a police computer printer. So they tried to get him done for theft. They'd actually arrested this policeman, for theft because he printed something off of they'd gone through the thing and worked out that once he'd done that, and he said, it's a bit of paper, and he's like, and they said to me, there's no price on theft. There's no price cap on theft. But yeah, that's what I mean. They was going after him for anything they could, and it got to the point where a higher up policeman come in, sat him down, and said, basically, take retirement, and just stop chasing this thing, because it's going in. He's like, this goes into royalty and everything. It goes so high up in the establishment that no one wants to touch it. And he was literally told, if you do not, he's like, if you don't back down now, you will lose your career, you'll lose your house, and then you'll lose your kids. Your kids will be taken off you and put into care. And he's like, I wasn't willing to lose that. He's like, so I took the retirement and left. But then he become a whistleblower, just not working for the police now. But his story's fascinating. But this is what I mean, and it's exactly the same thing what he's saying. Why aren't these people being spoke to? And it's because people in the police, like, it goes so deep. Like, yeah, this is so up my street. I listen to, like I say, the John Wedger Crime Theory series. It links all the big child murder cases together in our country. Like, it is crazy connected, and it is so common that people like that, like, they're not interviewed, or they're like, oh, well, we wait to the end. But there's so much going through my head now that I want to say. But yeah, let's carry on.
A simple declaration of no comment would be a newsworthy story.
I mean, I'm hopeful. I mean, investigative journalism does take time. I'm hopeful that there
You've
are.
got to be kidding. I'm going to shut you down on this. It's been over 6 months. This doesn't take that long to get a no comment from the CIA.
I'm not
the
talking
NSA,
about the
and
no
State
comment.
Department.
I'm not talking about the no comment. My point was going to be, given the amount of interest in the Epstein story, there must be some investigative journalists working on it. I completely agree with your points about the no comments. Like that is not being.
I'm sorry. It's not a question of some investigative journalist. We tripped over some enormous structure. We don't know what this structure was.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. The fortune that I think I've seen referenced is something like $600 million. Who with $600 million would make these purchases? You know, multiple jet aircrafts, private islands, you know, a townhouse on 71st Street in Manhattan, a huge complex in the New Mexico desert, property in Paris. It would appear that most of this was intended for display. I mean, in other words, the behavior patterns of Jeffrey Epstein suggest an 11-figure fortune, maybe high 11-figure fortune. This person appears to be somewhere in the 9 figures. That's 2 orders of magnitude off. Now, I know that very rich is very rich to many people, but, you know, as a person of much smaller means, I can tell you that if you hang around with people who are in this stratosphere, they behave very differently depending upon which order of magnitude they're at. And Jeffrey Epstein was at the wrong order of magnitude. He was behaving like a high 11-figure type guy, maybe, with what appears to be a...
And this is what's crazy with the Jimmy Savile thing. If you look up Jimmy Savile from this tallies up another one that tallies up exactly the same, where he had kind of wormed his way in to places, and then like, he basically was just a famous person, but where he had whatever he done, providing children for the right people and whatever, he had wormed his way in, and had the like, for example, Princess Diana and Charles was going to Jimmy Savile for relationship advice. That's how high up. He had Christmas dinner with the royal family every year. That's how high up. And all he was really was a radio DJ that caught the cusp of when rock and roll come in. But yeah, he somehow managed to get his way into Buckingham Palace, where he's hobnobbing with the Queen. And all he is he was a coal miner. I think his dad was a coal miner. Like, he's a working class lad that worked. Like, he doesn't have. So yeah, again, everything he's saying is just tallies up. Like, yeah.
Figure fortune.
Yeah, I mean, my point on this is that I don't know where the media interest is, and it doesn't add up that there wouldn't be media interest, given that the huge desire for the story that you can kind of see every time you log on.
Anything, any scrap is interesting to everybody.
Yeah, especially given that we already know the links to someone like Prince Andrew, the British royal family. This is one of the biggest, potentially one of the biggest stories
Let's talk
that
about
has ever happened.
well, let's talk about the interview with Prince Andrew.
Mm.
What was that? Now, I cannot believe my ears.
Don't say no more. That is the perfect sum up of an interview. Like the Prince Andrew interview, if you had no context of whatever he's being accused of, and I just gave you his excuses, you had no other context other than the things he used as excuses for why it must be not true, you would say this person is clearly lying. No matter what they're being accused of, the excuses was, yeah, what was that? Don't say no more. That is the perfect sum up. Yeah, exactly. What the fuck was that?
When very intelligent people watch that interview in its entirety and then say, well, he was unprepared, or it was a mistake
No,
to
he
grant that
seemed
interview.
very prepared
I think that that's
with
not true. I
bullshit
think we have no
answers.
idea what that interview represented. I think that that interview was so bizarre and so clearly.
In my humble opinion, is because I've also heard as well, like it's kind of all like been always been rumored that Prince Andrew was a bit like, for example, you have to stand up when a member of the royal family walk into a room, but they won't really. They're not really gonna. Andrew will make you. The rest of them really weren't that bothered. Do you know what I mean? You like if you was the security, you didn't have to stand up every time Princess Margaret walked past. But Andrew was someone that you actually did, and he'd tell people off and not. So he had that kind of. Um, but I think personally, what that represented was how someone who has never had to face real consequences for their actions, where he's never been questioned about his actions, and like people around him obviously are yes men because he's Prince Andrew and he's an asshole, that he's never really been. So he thinks, oh yeah, why wouldn't you believe that? Because probably the people around him would believe that, but just out of fear of who he is. Do you know what I mean? Like they don't really think it. They're just going along with it to keep the fucking crazy royal, fucking Nancy royal happy. But yeah, that's what that represented to me, was someone that was so above, or thinks they're above everyone in intelligence and is superior, that they'll believe any old balderdash. But yeah, you're not well versed obviously in having to justify your actions because you've been able to do whatever you wanted because you're little Lord Fauntleroy.
It's like he was trolling the media who was asking him questions. Was he forced to give an interview and he decided that he would rather go down with the ship and give the world's worst interview?
No, I really think it's that he's done, but also the Queen didn't okay that. 100%. You're not even, as a royal member of the royal family, you're not even meant to publicly even acknowledge criticism. They don't. Like the Queen, think of the things people have said about the Queen over the years. She's never come out and said, oh, this bastard said this. You're not meant to. And apparently that was where the Queen washed her hands with Andrew, because he made such a public spectacle. So the Queen didn't okay that. I do think that he's so arrogant and not as smart as he thinks he is, that he thought he was going to go out there and pull the wall over the public's eyes, and obviously it didn't work.
Was he realizing that he was completely trapped and that his best strategy was to make fun of the entire process by giving answers that were so implausible that no child would ever believe them? Whatever that interview was one of the most remarkable pieces of footage anybody has ever seen on television, bar none. To not be talking about this and say, we do not know what that interview represented. What was a member of the British royal family, the Queen's son,
Favorite son.
giving that interview? Was it in Buckingham Palace?
Yes, I think it was.
It was an insane event that happened where nobody came to a conclusion that makes that make any sense. I'd rather leave the problem open. Who was forced to do what by whom that interview would ever be granted?
Yeah, I can remember when it was first announced, having a sort of double take of like, this is not going to go well, and then the actual interview happened. And it was like
I think it went brilliantly
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
right? It was effectively
Yeah.
an admission that something is so off in the world, something that's so completely bizarre, that that thing would be produced. That was some sort of internal conflict. I don't know whether it was between the Queen and her son, or the intelligence services, or I don't know what, but it was sort of the sense that you have like almost a hostage.
No, it really was that. I think he was like, "Don't worry, Mumsy," but without saying it to her. Don't worry, Mumsy. I'll bloody sort this one out. And yeah, like I say, that was like I said before. You could kind of go, "Oh, maybe, maybe not." Do you know what I mean? It's his word against hers. But after the excuses, you're like, I don't know whether you did it or not, but I know 100% you was lying your ass off with every word you said in that interview, because it was so obvious. And like he said, so ridiculous.
Video where the person has to behave so bizarrely as to send a message. And the message I got is, I'm going to lie, I'm going to fabricate, I'm going to say preposterous things in an effort to just put this to bed in the worst possible way. Like, you now all know never to ask me questions about this, because I'm simply going to say the most outrageous and insane things that I can possibly think of.
I mean, as I said, it didn't twig at the beginning. It sounded like a terrible idea. But then I guess I rationalized it by thinking he's clearly got no self-awareness. Maybe he did think that he could clear his name.
Nobody's that dumb, David. Those questions were entirely expected. And the answers, if you look at the amount of twinkle in the eye, I mean, he's clearly not a happy man, but he's saying absolutely ludicrous and preposterous things. I think that the effect is exactly the reverse. If I had to speculate, I really don't want to, I would say that this interview was given because an amount of pressure was put on a human being who decided that his life was effectively over in most senses. And this is the way he chose to go out, effectively making fun of the entire process.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is I'm sort of aware, for example, the Royal Television Society Awards were 2 nights ago, the Journalism Awards, and the Prince Andrew interview won Scoop of the Year and Interview of the Year. So it's kind of been rationalized, and I've seen people talk about how they got the interview. The Newsnight producer was trying hard and was on Buckingham Palace, which is kind of ludicrous. The idea that it was just the dedication of the journalist continuing to ask for an interview that made Prince Andrew say, "Okay, you've asked me so many times." I mean, that in itself is kind of a ludicrous narrative, but it is a narrative that the mainstream, I've seen the mainstream media kind of integrate that whole thing into, wow, this is an amazing scoop. You were dead.
That's probably a pretty smart way to get the interview with him, though. Because like I say, I don't think the Queen knew. And you got to think, for someone like Andrew, who his whole life, his mother has, she run that family. Do you know what I mean? She kept it all proper. And basically, if that journalist would have gone to the Queen, it would have been an absolute no. And yeah, it was probably Prince Andrew's way of thinking, I'm going to show my mother I can handle this. And she probably thought, my God, my son's a moron.
And you got the story, which is kind of ludicrous. The idea that so you see what I'm saying.
I really don't. I mean,
What I'm saying is that it's already been rationalized within the mainstream media. The reason that interview happened was because they were so dedicated and they pursued Prince Andrew and they asked Buckingham Palace, and eventually they conceded and they gave the interview, which is kind of ludicrous. I'm saying it's ludicrous.
Well, it is ludicrous, but I guess, I mean, my expectation is that even if the UK is no longer the world power it once was, I presume you still have adults with IQs over 70. How could you possibly rationalize such a thing? I mean, we used to turn to you guys for intelligence and sophistication. This seems the height of folly. If I had to say, this is much closer to a hostage video where the hostage is attempting to send a message that is clearly not the ostensible message on video. The really difficult part of the story, David, is that almost certainly we're talking about some kind of operation that was being run with knowledge of governments that may have involved pedophilia and was not shut down. And what I can't understand is what is it that is keeping some reporter from simply asking the questions that are on everybody's mind? Was this person connected to the intelligence services? Where was Ghislaine Maxwell's passport last seen? Why are we not talking to Les Wexner? Where are the trading records? What is the source of the fortune? It seems to me very clear that we have a missing fortune of Robert Maxwell and an unexplained fortune of Jeffrey Epstein. Are those the same fortune? Who's asking these questions? Did everybody go to sleep when they taught journalism in school? I just don't understand.
I guess my sort of disconnect as well is this sense of, I worked in Channel 4 News, they had an investigative unit. These were the kind of bread and butter questions. They pushed really hard, for example, on the phone hacking scandal in the UK, the Murdoch Papers phone hacking scandal that also involved networks of power, it involved shady deals, it involved corruption, and they pursued that quite intensely. I'm feeling this sense of dislocation because I agree with you, there are these questions that are not being asked, and I find it difficult to understand why that is, knowing that the public interest and knowing that these questions have been asked in the past.
Let me tell you what happened. People started asking those questions and they stopped. And that's what idea suppression is all about.
Yeah, that's the truth. But like I said, it has gone through the whole history of the country, and same with America. America is exactly the same. It's exactly the same stories, but it is. Why aren't them questions being asked? Because the people that ask them questions disappear. They end up in what other way? I think that was a John Wedge. I don't even. It might not have been John Wedger actually, but another policeman who again is a whistleblower for the child abuse in our country, but said like 98 of the 101, whether it's victims or witnesses or whatever involved in this child abuse case in our country, 98 of the 101 all died under suspicious circumstances. And just like, yeah, that's fine. No one knows about it. The world just carries on. Like it's so, but that's why people do ask them questions, and the people that ask the questions ain't here no more, or they end up like John Wedger. I've never known a man have so much information that, like John Wedger gets called up all the time and basically told, and he'll tell you that as well. Like I got a phone call off of bloody blah, and he's like, and they have said, don't do this, don't do that, don't say this, don't say that. He's like, I'm not. I've got a family. I've got to look after. He's like, so I'm not gonna like. But he exposes as much as he can and kind of investigates as much as he can. But yeah, that's why people do ask that. People have asked that question, but you don't live much longer once you start asking them types of questions.
We don't have the resources to pursue that right now. Well, actually, I'm concerned that this is starting to reek of conspiracy theory. I think given the delicacies of the situation, I'm going to need a lot more evidence before I give this thing the go-ahead. These are the sorts of things that you say when you're trying to shut down a line of inquiry. And my guess is that whatever the story is, it represents some very powerful structure that we tripped over. And I tripped over that structure in 2002. And I was convinced at the time, before there was any knowledge about this Florida situation, that this was constructed. I mean, we have a very famous case of a guy named Elie Cohn, who was fitted with a backstory and became a playboy in Damascus and held orgies, if I understand correctly, where he collected information and leverage against people in the Syrian government. If you take that situation, this looks remarkably similar. We've got a guy who was apparently a math teacher at a private high school, and the next thing we know, he's avoided jail in some sort of financial scandal, and he's suddenly set up as a mystery financier with connections to absolutely everyone in the top echelons of power. Something doesn't smell right about the story, given that nobody appears to have ever traded currencies with a guy who was apparently moving billions as a currency trader.
Yeah, I like that. I'd quite like to talk to him. I didn't think that journalist, because I have a whole other world of information. Like, I've been watching things on this. Like I say, I've been watching John Wedger. The second I come across John Wedger, I've watched just about everything he's ever said. Like, but he's, yeah, I do kind of go to it. But like, when it gets into, even I'll take as well someone who's not John Wedger, and but it was a journalist. Him saying that journalist saying to him that there's investigative journalists, blah blah blah. Um, well, this investigative journalist that I don't actually know how he come across, but it was child abuse in a care home. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember the initial thing that perked this guy's interest. He's like, he's like, just he was writing for a paper, I think, and he come across this thing of possible abuse in the child homes in our country, like historically and leading up to the modern day, and he put in the paper that basically like an advert saying, or not an advert, but an article saying, look, has anyone had any um, experiences of this sort, or anyone have any bad experiences in growing up in care homes in our country? And he said one man come in. He's like, I just didn't kind of done it, and then didn't really think nothing more of it. He said, and then this guy come in and said, um, "You the person that did that?" And he's like, I said, "Yeah." He said, and he's like, "Can I talk to you?" He's like a 98-year-old man. He said that he sat down and he started reeling off abuse that had happened to him over the years. And he's like, at first I thought, he's like, the first thing he's like, as this man was sitting there talking to me, he's like, I started thinking, is he crazy? He's like, I'm either talking to, this man's either crazy or he's telling me the most important story of my whole life. And he's like, so then he started to look it up and go into records and that. And there was something that journalist said. He was looking for child abuse rings in the care homes and any prosecutions with it. And under the Freedom of Information Act, you're allowed supposedly to be able to, as a public person, you're allowed to anything you want, government, you're allowed to get. So he said, I requested criminal things to do with child homes. So, and they said no. And he said, there isn't any records. The records don't go back that far. He's like, that's what they come back and said. And he's like, but, he's like, you can quite easily get whole transcripts of court transcripts of cases, court cases from the Victorian era. But you have the cases go all the way back to there where you can get people that have been hung in our country for what they done and how. He's like, literally you can get word for word transcribed. He's like, but I'm asking you about child abuse in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, and you don't know, it don't go back that far. The records don't go back that far. And he's like, and then that was basically it. Once I he that knockback made him kind of go, there's something to this that they're hiding, because this is not normal. It's not normal procedure to say, to deny thing, and it's not normal to say, oh, the records don't go back that far. I'm sorry, we have no information from that time. But yet you have one from the 18th century or the 17th century or whatever. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It goes so deep. But I'd like to have a conversation with Eric Weinstein, because he's more like, like there's a lot of logical, but I think he does, because he's saying about the tripping over a structure. It's so true. Like I say, look up John Wedger's story. He tripped over that. A lot of people have tripped over that structure and had their lives completely ruined. Completely ruined. But yeah, I recommend. There's so much stuff that I want to kind of show people, and because it's like, but I recommend the John Wedger crime theory playlist. Um, and yeah, he goes through all the child abuse cases in our country and shows you how they're all linked, and like even like autopsies of the children are all done by the same autopsy guy. Like I think like a certain amount of the main child abuse or like serial killers and child abuse things, yeah, it was the same autopsy person, and then he's connected to, and it's just crazy. But yeah, I think Eric Weinstein is a, I like his kind of way of looking at it as well with the money. It's a much more real world logical way of going at it, that he's got all this money, clearly not from what he said he is. Basically what he's saying is it's like um making someone I don't know, with a big basketball team in America, but basically just taking any old Joe Smo off the block and throwing him on a basketball court within the best team in America, and him just stumbling and falling all over the place and being uncoordinated, and yeah, and where you go, he shouldn't be here. But then he's like ridiculously rich, like the highest paid athlete, and he's got the confidence of the greatest basketball. Yeah, it's that type of thing where you go, mm, yeah, the position and the doesn't equal the guy. Yeah. And that's what I mean. I like that, and I'd like to have a conversation with this guy because he seems like a very more um what you can actually pin down. I saw a great person do a thing on Russell Brand, a lawyer, American lawyer, on the Russell Brand situation, and it was a great podcast because he's literally flicking from side to side, and he says a great thing at the start. He's like, I don't care whether he's like whether he did it or not, whether the person done the crime or not is irrelevant. It's whether you can prove the person did the crime, and he's like, and that's what I'm interested in. He's like, but then he does like a basically like flicking from defense and prosecution of the Russell Brand thing. And like 1 minute he's on the girl side and saying this, and then the next thing he's flicked and say like, and it's obviously how the prosecution and the defense would play it out in court and what they might pick out. And it was actually fascinating. But it was good because I'm definitely like way more into the like where the things like I'd go into make people think you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, even though it's all provable. But that's where it goes into, where you get the powerful elite pedos, and it's, people starts thinking you're sounding David Icke. But it is true; it's been proved. Like I'll but yeah, I like the. It doesn't matter whether you know they did it or not. It's whether you can prove they did it or not. And that's yeah. Where was he getting that money? What was that money? How? Yeah. Well, it's obvious he's making it from kids, and but yeah, yeah. This was a great one. But yeah, that's the reaction. Sweet.